In the distant future, in the far reaches of space, we find a thriving human civilization. Their decades-long journey from Earth was one of great difficulty that required immense ingenuity and necessitated rapid scientific and technological progress. The chief architects of these advancements were a human named Deacon Pagin and Godos, a powerful and enigmatic artificial intelligence. While the pair are responsible for the salvation of humankind, they created something else, something secret, the Loghan, a time travel device. Immediately after it proved functional, Deacon kidnapped multiple scientists and disappeared in time, along with the plans for the Loghan. In response, CARSEC was formed, a security force with the sole purpose of finding out when Deacon is gone and why. Now, 10 years later, CARSEC have managed to create their own Loghan. They have tracked Deacon to the year 1077. All that remains to do is to assemble a team of CARSEC's top agents. Welcome back to Ready Steady Play. In this video, we're going to learn all about the narrative adventure game Castle von Loghan. This is a cooperative game for 1 to 8 players that follows the story of the CARSEC team as they journey through time to discover, and if necessary, stop the plans of Deacon Pagin. In the game, you'll discover their story over 10 linked chapters, which each take 1 to 4 hours to play. In this video, we'll cover the components, setting up the game, and how to play. If you want to jump straight to the rules, or find something specific, all of the sections are linked in the description down below. And I'd like to thank Underground Games, the publisher of Castle von Loghan, for sponsoring this video. Before we start, note that there are 2 versions of the game, a regular version and this deluxe version. Both versions follow the same fundamental rules, so this video will apply to both. There are a few small differences, which I will mention in the video. So let's get started by taking a look at the components. In the box you'll find a rulebook and a dialogue book. And now let's look at the components for the main gaming area. You'll have 10 chapter decks, or 11 if you have the deluxe set, each of which contains an intro card, an outro card, as well as a number of point of interest cards, story event cards, locked cards, and mission cards. I'll cover how to assemble these decks in a later section. So you have one main game board with 1077 and a double-sided board with 2077 on one side and 3077 on the other side. And if you happen to have the deluxe set, then your 1077 board will have 2155 on the reverse. You'll find 3 decks of random event cards in 3 colors, green, blue, and red, 4 decks of enemy cards in green, blue, red, and purple, 4 decks of treasure cards, green, blue, red, and purple, 1 deck of ally cards, 1 deck of upgrade cards, 1 deck of contract cards, 1 deck of Loghan chase cards, and 10 warden cards. 1 group health cube, 1 group clarity cube, some large damage cubes, some small damage cubes, and for each character, you'll find a character board, 4 decision cards, 32 combat cards, and 1 energy marker cube. You'll also find a selection of tokens in the box. First, let's cover the large tokens, which you'll need for every game. You'll need 1 leader token, 1 group token, 12 each of the green, blue, and red event tokens. And now let's look at the small tokens. There are 3 types, which you'll need for every chapter of the game. 10 locked door tokens, 12 tracker tokens, and 4 stun tokens. These tokens will only be needed in certain chapters. 8 destroyed tokens, 8 mystery tokens, 8 gas tokens, 8 fire tokens, 6 wizard tokens, 5 clue tokens, 4 fragment tokens, 3 deacon tokens, 3 keybot tokens, 2 person tokens, 1 skull token, 1 Loghan token, and 3 anomaly tokens for the past, present, and future. There are 8 agent tokens, These tokens are only used in the deluxe version of the game in the Unshackled Game Mode and Chapter 11. And now that we understand what we have in the box, let's get set up so we can start playing. If you've already organized your game, you can skip to the chapter on player count. But if not, then before we play our first game, we should organize our card decks, starting with our chapter decks. When you first open the game, you'll have to set up the chapter decks. In the regular game, there are 10, and in the deluxe game, there's 11. Each deck is made up of an intro card, an outro card, and a number of point of interest cards, event cards, locked cards, and mission cards throughout. Each card in the deck has a unique number that tells you where it is placed in the deck. Let's look at Chapter 1 for example. The first number is the position of the card in the deck, and the second number is the chapter number. In the Chapter 1 deck, the second number on each card will be the number 1. The first number on the outro card will tell you how many cards are supposed to be in the deck in total. Your intro, outro, and mission cards are marked with an A side and a B side. Make sure that they are on their A side. The point of interest cards and locked cards should have their text open, and your story event cards should show the side with the title of the event at the top. Once you've sorted these, you will want some way to store them so that they're ready for you to start playing. Now that our chapter decks are set up, we just have a few more decks to sort before we're ready to play. Of the remaining cards, you will find 3 decks of large random event cards. Separate these into green, blue, and red. You can shuffle them. The order should be random. You'll find 4 enemy decks with large cards. Sort the cards by their 4 different colored backs: green, blue, red, and purple. You should shuffle these cards, but there's no need to shuffle the purple deck. These enemies are each unique, and during the game you'll be instructed to hunt in the deck for specific cards. The remaining cards are all the standard size cards. There are 2 decks of cards for each agent in their color. A deck of 4 decision cards and a deck of 32 combat cards. There are 4 treasure decks in green, blue, red, and purple. You may shuffle these decks. Don't look at the purple treasures, they're secret. Just like the purple enemies, you will be instructed to draw specific cards during the game. Finally, we will have decks that we will be called upon during the game where appropriate. Sort these into 5 decks: ally cards, Loghan chase cards, warden cards, contract cards, and upgrade cards. You may sort the upgrade cards by whether or not they depict an agent, as well as by the agent shown on the card, if you like. Now that we have all of our cards arranged, let's talk about the player count. The game can be played with between 1 and 8 players, but it's suggested to play with 4, 5, or 6. It's recommended to play with at least 4 players because the game is balanced for 4 to 6 Carsec agents. More than 6 players will work, but the game will feel a bit more random. If you play with fewer than 4 players, you may choose to include 4 agents and split up control amongst the players however you like. Alternatively, you may play with fewer than 4 Carsec agents. However, this will make the game increasingly difficult for each agent you're missing. Whether you're playing your first game of Castle von Loghan or the next chapter in the adventure, you will start setup by taking the chapter deck for the chapter you intend to play and following the instructions on its intro card. The intro card will tell you which board to use, where the group token starts, where to place any tokens that start on the board, where to place any locked door tokens, and whether you should have any specific ally cards in play. The group token could start anywhere, but typically it starts on the pod or POD, which is also where it starts in your first game. When placing the locked door tokens, you will note that the rooms on the board are numbered. Each door within the room that is locked is noted by its cardinal direction, with the top of the board being north. For Chapter 1, we'll place 5 door tokens, 1 on the west door in room 2, 1 on the north door in room 16, 1 on the east door of room 21, and 2 on the west and south doors of the throne room. The green, blue, and red random event tokens have an event side and a search side. The search side is intended to be hidden, so place the random event tokens event side up and do not look at the underside until instructed. Next, let's take the 4 treasure decks, 4 enemy decks, and 3 random event decks and place them on the table. Shuffle each deck except for the purple treasure deck and purple enemy deck. You'll need to leave space for each deck to have a discard pile nearby. Take out the leader token, group health cube, group clarity cube, damage cubes, tracker tokens, stun tokens, and event tokens. You may need additional tokens, but these are the ones you'll need in every game. Place the group health cube on the group health track. The starting value is equal to 10 plus the number of agents. If we were to play with 4 agents, we'd place it on 14. Place the group clarity cube on the 10 value space of the clarity track. Leave some space for a combat row. This is where you will place enemy cards when you fight them. Place the chapter deck nearby where the group can easily access it. Next, each player chooses an agent. For your first game, it is recommended that you play with Pill, Forsenthal, Serra, and Vigovar. Take the appropriate agent board and matching decision cards and combat deck. Shuffle the combat deck and place it nearby. Place the yellow energy cube on the 5 space of the energy track. Finally, choose one player to be the group's leader, using any method you like. We're almost ready to start, but finally, a note on setting up your agents in future chapters. The game takes place in different time periods called eras. These are represented by the different game boards. In the first chapter, we're in an era of 1077. Our agents have arrived without any equipment and will have to find some. As long as the agents remain in this era, they can keep any treasure cards they find here, between chapters. However, when they travel to a different era, they will only be able to take with them treasure cards that won't disrupt the timeline. These items are called timeless, and can be identified by the clock icon in the upper right-hand side of the card. You may find the odd rare timeless item in any of the treasure decks, but the mysterious and valuable purple treasure cards are all timeless. We'll look more at timeless cards in a later section, but for now, let's start the adventure. Castle von Loghan is a cooperative adventure game that takes place over 10 chapters, 11 if you have the deluxe version. Each chapter is one play session that takes between 1 and 4 hours to complete. In each chapter you will play through the chapter deck, resolving the cards, instructions until you reach the outro card, which will conclude this part of the story. Of course, your group may die before they can get there. I have given you the briefest introduction to the story at the start of this video, but you should begin the game by reading the game intro and prologue from the dialogue book. This will introduce you to the world and the 8 agent characters: Forsenthal, Pill, Arvius, Vigovar, Wagata, Spectre, Kara, Serra, and Isa. Although you will likely be playing with 4, 5, or 6 of the 8 available agents, all the agent characters play a role in the story, and it's assumed they are traveling together. Each agent has a backstory on the reverse of their character board, and you can discover more about them by reading this. All of the agents are represented by the group token, and they move collectively around the board. The group also shares a health track and clarity track. Both are shown on the main game board. This means the group prevails or fails together. Ultimately, the goal of the agents, or at least what we know at the outset, is that they seek to stop Deacon Pagan and the Godos AI from disrupting the timeline. In order to make sure this happens, you should always keep the objectives from the chapter deck in mind. You'll need to advance through the chapter deck in order to progress the story. Along the way, you will discover that there are opportunities for additional exploration which may prove lucrative, albeit potentially dangerous. A chapter is won when the group reaches the outro card, which is the final card in the chapter deck. If the group's health drops to 0 at any point, then you've failed the chapter. You should reset your progress to the start of the chapter and try again. Now we understand our mission, let's learn how we're going to carry it out. The structure of each session of Castle von Loghan is defined by the chapter deck. After you've finished setup, you'll begin the game by reading side B of the intro card you used to set up the main game area. This will lead you to the group's first objective. Once you've resolved the intro card and any additional cards it instructs you to resolve, then you will proceed to the movement phase, which is the first phase of a round. Rounds will then be resolved repeatedly until the group reaches the outro card of the chapter deck, or fails in their attempt to do so. If you do reach the outro card, then that means you've won this session. Congratulations! Now let's look in more detail at how a round is structured. Each chapter is divided up into rounds. The rounds continue until the group reaches the outro card of the chapter deck, or the group runs out of health. Each round has 4 phases: the movement phase, phase 2, which is the event phase, phase 3, the combat phase, and phase 4, the refresh phase. During the movement phase, the group token moves around the board. The movement phase ends when the group chooses to encounter either a random event or a story token or effect. Once the group has triggered an effect like this, proceed to the event phase, where the effects of the story or token will be resolved. If the outcome of the event phase results in combat, then proceed to the combat phase. Otherwise, the combat phase is skipped. Finally, in the refresh phase, each member of the group can take a different action to recover or search the area. The next round begins with the leader token moving clockwise around the table. This means that each round is characterized by the resolution of a story moment in the form of a card or token which might progress the main plot, or take the form of a random event or side quest. It may optionally include combat and other minor actions like managing equipment, searching, and resting. Now I'll take you through the movement phase, event phase, and refresh phase. We'll look at the combat phase in a later section of this video as it's the most complex phase. In the movement phase, the group token moves around the board. The group is blocked by any walls or locked doors and cannot move through other tokens on the board, unless card text says otherwise. The group token does not have a limited amount of movement, so the phase only ends when the group chooses to encounter either a random event token or triggers an active story effect. If the group cannot agree on a course of action, then the leader has final say on what the group does. The story effects will come from one of the 3 card types in the chapter deck, either a mission card, locked card, or point of interest card. Pay close attention to the effects on the story cards so that you know when they trigger. For example, the first locked card in the Chapter 1 deck reads, "When the agents move inside the foyer." When the group token moves into the foyer, this will trigger the end of the movement phase and the beginning of the event phase. If you choose to encounter a random event token, do not look at the reverse. The search side is intended to be hidden. In the event phase, the group will resolve either a random event tile or story effect. There are 4 different types of cards you might resolve in this phase: mission cards, locked cards, point of interest cards, or event cards, which could be story events or random events. Random events are resolved just like story events, but they do not advance the plot. If you're resolving a random event, you will only resolve one random event card. If you are resolving any of the cards from the chapter deck, you will likely resolve a combination of locked, point of interest, mission, and story event cards. Let's look at the chapter deck first. The type of card indicates the purpose of the card. Mission cards are the group's immediate next objective. Locked cards require the group to perform a task in order to overcome them. Point of interest cards correspond to locations or tokens on the board which the group can or must investigate, and the story event cards provide narrative decisions to the group. It is common for the group to have multiple options to explore at any given time. The intro card to each chapter will give the group their first instructions. After resolving the intro card, if you're ever unsure of what to do next, check the most recent card the group has revealed on the chapter deck. Each different card type contains specific instructions, so read them carefully. Often you will resolve more than one card in succession. Some of them might instruct you to change the tokens on the board. Some of them might tell you to gain a treasure card. Many of them will instruct you to resolve another card from the chapter deck. When you are instructed to put out tokens, these typically represent important story elements. Often the tokens are set up by the mission cards, which also provide context for what the token represents. When done resolving story cards, you will likely have a mission card that tells you what your mission is, and a locked card or a point of interest card on top of the chapter deck that indicates what you need to do next in order to progress. On any of these cards, you may also see the story moment text. This code refers to a section in the dialogue book. You can find the section by checking the index. You can read this to learn more about the events that are taking place and hear some of the dialogue between the agents and the characters in the scene. If the group ended their movement on a random event token or have encountered a story event, then you will resolve an event card. If it is a random event card, draw the bottom card of the deck which matches the color of the random event token. If it is a story event card, it will have been drawn from the chapter deck. The leader reads aloud the text in the center of the card and the 4 choices below. Each choice is marked with a letter. Each agent decides what they will do by picking the decision card that matches their choice and playing it face down. You may lie about what you're intending to do if you wish. What matters is what's on the card you play. Once everyone has picked a card, then they reveal their choices. The leader flips over the event card and reads out the entries that correspond to the agent's choices. An entry is applied to each agent who picked it, which means it can be applied more than once. When applying these outcomes, the first few times it will be helpful to use the icon list found on page 45 of the rulebook. If you see this hint icon next to the text on the event card, pay special attention to that text. You may even want to write it down. It could prove useful. Once the outcomes are applied, then it's time to read the event results from the bottom of the card. There will be some story text in white, and then there may be some instructions in yellow. There are 3 possible outcomes to an event. Either you resolve the yellow text, or you summon a lurking enemy, or you summon enemies. Once the yellow text is resolved, you can discard the event card and move on to the refresh phase. When you summon a lurking enemy, take an enemy card from the deck which matches the color of the event card that instructed you to summon the lurking enemy. Set it face down on the table. Enemies are summoned in a combat row, and this lurking enemy is the first card in that combat row. Any additional lurking enemies are placed to the right of this one, and the next time you summon enemies, place them to the right of the rightmost lurking enemy. It's helpful to know that you will only ever summon lurking enemies when interacting with a random event token, either during the resolution of the random event or when resolving a sneak or search action in the refresh phase. Try not to accrue too many lurking enemies all at once, or you'll have a very difficult fight in your near future. Once you've set the card in the combat row, you can proceed to the refresh phase. It is very unlikely, but if you do have any lurking enemies left over after resolving a chapter's outro card, simply discard them. If you see an enemy symbol on your event card, then you will have to summon enemies. The color of the enemy symbol will tell you which enemy deck to draw from. The green enemy symbol means draw from the green enemy deck, and so on. Whenever you see the enemy symbol, spawn a number of enemy cards equal to the number of agents in the game minus 1. For example, in a game with 4 agents, this card would summon 3 green enemies. If the symbol is preceded by a number, then summon that many enemies instead. For example, in a game with 4 agents, this card would summon 3 blue enemies and 1 red enemy. Sometimes you'll be instructed to summon a purple enemy. Purple enemies are unique, and so in this case, the symbol will always be preceded by the name of the card. Find the card in the purple enemy deck. Watch out. You may also have to summon additional enemies from the random enemy decks as well. When summoning enemies, make sure to draw them out and place them in a row, starting from the left. Their order is important. If there are any lurking enemy cards in the combat row, these are revealed and then the summoned enemies are added, starting in the position to the right of the rightmost lurking enemy. Otherwise, proceed to the refresh phase. In rare cases, some event cards may instruct you to skip the refresh phase. Always follow the instructions on the cards. Now that you understand how to resolve the event cards, let's move on to the refresh phase. We'll discuss how to resolve the combat phase in a later section. The refresh phase represents the agents taking a moment to rest and recover, or perhaps to go exploring for treasures. There are 5 steps to the refresh phase. The first step is to check the group's clarity. If the group has 0 clarity, then they lose 1 health point. The second step is to remove all tracker tokens from skills. Step 3 is to refresh all exhausted ally and treasure cards. Rotate them 90 degrees to the left so they're vertically aligned. Step 4 is the main part of the phase. Each agent can choose to carry out one of the following 5 actions: rest, rally, recharge, sneak, or search. Agents can discuss which actions they take, but they're carried out in player order. The search action is always carried out last, after all other agents have resolved their actions. For each agent that takes the rest action, the group gains 1 health and 1 clarity. When an agent takes the rally action, they shuffle their combat discard pile back into their combat deck. When an agent takes the recharge action, they gain 3 energy on their agent board. The sneak and search actions relate to the random event token's face-down search side. Each token is divided into 5 spaces: 4 outside spaces, which are resolved during a search action, and the diamond space in the center, which is resolved during the sneak action. When an agent takes the sneak action, they choose a random event token in a room that the group could move to in the next movement phase, and they may look at the search side of that token. They may not show it to the group. They must replace it face down after looking and rotate it 90 degrees. This is to indicate that another agent cannot use a sneak action to look at it. Once the token has been replaced, the player may communicate to the group what they saw, and they must resolve the icon in the diamond space at the center of the token. There are 3 possible options for the sneak space. Draw 1 lurking enemy card and add it to the combat row. Draw a treasure card from the matching colored treasure deck, or nothing happens. An agent may only declare a search action if there is a face-down random event token in the room the group is in. If an agent declares a search action, nothing happens right away. Instead, once all agents have resolved their actions, any agents that declared a search action will resolve the random event token in the room together. Each random event token can only be resolved by a maximum of 4 agents, so if a 5th agent would like to declare this action, they may not. The group will only resolve the search side of a random event token if at least 1 agent chose the search action. If no one did, then the token is discarded face down. If at least 1 agent chose the search action, then flip the random event token and resolve the search side. The token is resolved in a clockwise order, starting from the top left outside space. You'll resolve 1 space for each agent that took the search action up to a maximum of 4. The diamond space is resolved during a sneak action, not the search action. There are 7 possible results for the search action. Treasure. The agent draws a treasure card from the matching treasure deck. Blank. Nothing happens to that agent. Energy. The agent gains the energy shown on the tile. Clarity. The group gains 1 clarity. Health. The group gains 1 health. Lurking enemy. Draw and set 1 lurking enemy into the combat row. The Gobbly Merchant, an odd little fellow that will sell you treasure cards. Draw 3 treasure cards, 1 from the green deck, 1 from the blue deck, and 1 from the red deck. Any of the agents may buy these treasures. If there is any disagreement, then the leader decides. Treasure cards are bought by paying the energy cost in the top left from the agent's board. Any treasures that are not bought are discarded. Note that because timeless cards do not have an energy cost, Gobbly cannot sell them. So if you draw any timeless cards at this step, discard them back to the appropriate treasure discard pile. The final step of the refresh phase is to discard a random event token from the room if there is one. The token is always discarded, regardless of whether it was searched or not. The group is now ready to begin a new round, which starts by passing the leader token clockwise to the next agent. Now we understand the structure of the round, let's take a look in more detail at our agents and their equipment, starting with the treasure cards. Let's take a look at the treasure cards. I have already discussed the difference between timeless treasure cards and treasure cards that are not timeless. So here's a link to that section if you need a refresher. Otherwise, timeless treasures follow the same rules as regular treasures. There are two main types of treasure cards: items and weapons. Items and weapons are each classified as either large or small size. The name of the item appears in the top left of the card, with its type next to it on the right. The colored band tells you which treasure deck the card has come from. Generally speaking, these escalate in quality from green to blue and then red, and with the purple unique items being the best. In the center of the card is art depicting the treasure. This is surrounded by the icons, and at the bottom is the treasure card's effect, if any. Let's look at these icons next. Timeless treasures feature the timeless symbol in the upper right below the card type. We'll look at timeless cards more in a minute. Item cards only have one icon, which is an energy value. Weapons also have an energy value, but in addition, they have a damage type, hand requirement, and combat power. The energy value is used to purchase treasures from the Gobbly merchant, and is also the amount of energy received when an agent burns a treasure card from their inventory. We'll look at burning cards for energy when we look at the agent's board. The damage type of a weapon is checked during combat. Some enemies are weak to certain damage types, while others are resistant to them. The enemy card will detail the impact. The special damage type is the strongest. It counts as any damage type an enemy is weak to, and no enemies are resistant to it. Shield weapons feature the shield icon instead. This tells you they're defensive weapons, and that their combat power will generally be lower than offensive weapons. The hand requirement tells you whether the weapon is one-handed or two-handed. Each agent has 2 hand slots and can equip 1 or 2 weapon cards at a time based on this icon. The combat power of a weapon card tells you how many cards you can draw per round of combat. More is generally better. At the bottom of the card is its effect. Some cards have no effect, others have 1 or 2. Some effects have a cost, which might be energy, clarity, or it may require the treasure to be discarded. First, pay any costs. Then, if the card is not discarded, exhaust it by rotating it 90 degrees to the right. It cannot use an effect again until it is refreshed. Weapon cards that are exhausted can still contribute their combat power during combat. Timeless treasure cards can be identified by the timeless symbol in the top right, which replaces the energy value. This means that timeless treasure cards do not have an energy value. They cannot be burned for energy. There may be a chapter card that calls for a timeless item to be discarded or destroyed, in which case the card text takes priority. Timeless treasure cards may also feature this symbol in the center left. This indicates that it's part of a set. If it is part of a set, then it possesses a second effect on the treasure card, which allows for a number of these cards to be destroyed and replaced by a unique and powerful purple treasure card. When a card is destroyed, it is removed from the game and returned to the box, so that it will not appear in this game again. Ally cards represent characters from the story who agree to help the agents on their adventure. The name of the character is in the top center with character art in the middle, and a character effect at the bottom. The clarity symbol in the upper right hand corner of the card is the cost to use the effect at the bottom of the card. The group must agree to pay this cost in clarity, and then the card is turned 90 degrees to the right, and the card effect is carried out. The card effect cannot be used again until the card is refreshed in the refresh phase. Now that we understand how to use our allies and treasures, let's take a deeper look at our agents. Each agent board has a character profile on the back. On the front are the agent's skills, energy track, and inventory and upgrade spaces. In the top center of the board is the agent's call sign. An agent starts with 3 skills. Every agent has the overcharge skill and 2 other skills specific to that agent. For example, Sarah has the Pathfinder skill and, of course, her trusty companion Isa. Skills can be used at any time, but it will likely be fairly clear from a skill's function when it ought to be used. The overcharge ability always costs 2 clarity, which is taken from the group's pool. The agent's skills cost energy and require clarity to be at or above a certain level. After a skill is used, place a tracker token on it. A skill cannot be used again until the tracker token is removed, most commonly in the refresh phase. Below the agent's skills is their energy track. Energy is used to pay for their abilities as well as to manipulate their combat cards. More on that later. An agent cannot go above 10 energy. On the right side of the player board are 2 spaces for upgrade cards. An agent will only ever have 2 upgrades. The game will instruct you when an agent receives an upgrade card. You may look through the upgrade deck and choose either a generic upgrade or one of the agent's 2 agent-specific upgrades. You may change any upgrade you have chosen for a different applicable upgrade at the beginning of each chapter. There are reminders when you can do this on the intro cards. Around the left side and bottom of their agent board are spaces that make up the agent's inventory. There are 2 backpack spaces for small items, 2 hand spaces for equipped weapons, and 2 belt spaces that can hold any treasure card. This means an agent can, at most, carry 6 treasure cards at a time. The hand spaces each show 1 combat power, as though they are weapons. This is the agent's unarmed combat power. It will be much more effective to find a weapon as soon as possible. An agent can hold 2 one-handed weapons or 1 two-handed weapon. When you equip a two-handed weapon, place it in the center of the 2 hand slots covering the 2 combat power symbols. They may even carry 2 shields if they like. If an agent draws a treasure card and they cannot carry it, they must either burn it for energy, give it to another player, or discard it. If it is a timeless treasure, then they may place it in the pod instead. When a treasure card is burned, the agent gains energy equal to the energy value of the card. Increase the agent's energy track by this amount, keeping in mind that an agent cannot go above 10. The agents store all of the useful things that they find in their pod. The pod can only be visited during the movement phase. There is no limit to how far the group can move, so the agents may always visit the pod before triggering the event phase. The group may store up to 10 treasure cards in the pod. The treasure cards in the pod are stored, but not safe. If the game forces the group to lose treasure cards, this will affect all the eligible treasures in the pod, just like it affects treasure cards that the group is carrying. Additionally, any treasure cards in the pod that are not timeless will be lost when the group travels to another time period. Agents can trade treasure cards with each other whenever they like, except during the combat phase. Now that we understand our agent boards, inventories, and skills, it's time to put the agents to the test in the combat phase. If you have any face-up enemy cards in the combat row on the table at the end of the event phase, then a combat will take place. The agents will have to defeat all of these enemies or die trying. Only once the entire row has been defeated will the combat phase end. In Castle von Loghan, the agents are equipped with special suits that allow them to manipulate time. In combat, this means that they can alter the flow of events to their advantage. However, changing time drains the energy of the suit, so you'll have to manage the agent's energy reserves carefully. Each agent has their own combat deck made up of combat cards. Combat will be resolved using these cards and the face-up enemy row. The agent's combat deck represents both the agent's attacks against their enemies and the enemy's defenses and counterattacks. The agent's cards are in their color and are all beneficial, while the enemy's combat cards are gray. These cards don't belong to a specific enemy, they just represent the dynamic nature of the combat. Generally speaking, you want to resolve as many of the agent's combat cards as possible, and as few of the enemy's combat cards. Each side features two types of combat cards. Our agents have attack and support cards, while our enemies have strike and hazard cards. Attack cards typically deal damage to our enemies, while support cards help the agent or group in some way. For example, they might heal the group or allow the agent to recover energy. Strike cards typically deal damage to the group, and hazard cards have various negative effects, such as negating attack cards or weapon effects. Many combat cards refer to agents within reach. This term means the agents to the left or right of the agent. There are 11 steps in the combat phase. Steps 2 and 11 are only resolved once at the beginning and end of the combat phase, while steps 1 and 3 to 10 will be repeated until all enemies or agents are defeated. Step 1 is select weapons. In this step, agents choose which of their weapons they will use in this fight. Agents may swap between weapons in their hand spaces and belt spaces. However, they cannot trade weapons with one another or use weapons stored in the pod. During this step, any weapons that have been exhausted for their abilities will refresh. Step 2 is called Activate Start of Combat Effects. In this step, any cards, skills, or effects that specify start of combat should be resolved. This is also when you resolve the initiative and overwhelmed states. Overwhelmed means draw one card fewer during step 3, while initiative lets you draw an extra card to your agent board, which you may play in just a moment. In step 3, each agent draws combat cards from their deck equal to their combat power. If an agent has no weapons equipped, they have an unarmed combat power of 1 per free hand. However, if you have 1 or more weapons equipped, then you will draw combat cards equal to the total combat power of your equipped weapon cards. You may not choose to draw fewer cards. This is also when an agent would use their overcharge skill if they wished. They may choose to use it after drawing their combat cards. It's very important that combat cards are drawn and placed in order from left to right. Thematically, these represent the order of the actions being carried out in combat. In the game, the position of a combat card in the row is called its timing. The leftmost card is in timing 1, and the next card in timing 2, and so on. In step 4, agents may resolve the discard and replace keywords. Discard is resolved by moving a combat card from its timing to the combat card discard pile. Replace is the same, but after removing the card, draw a new card and place it in the same timing position. These keywords can be found in many places. You'll use them in this step to try and improve your timing row by removing hazard and strike cards. Be careful though, there's always a chance you might replace a combat card with something worse. For example, because charge support's first card effect allows the agent to replace a combat card, and its second card effect allows agents in reach to replace combat cards, one or both effects could be resolved now. Effects are separated by a line. If you see the keyword discard or replace, resolve all of the text in that section of the card. In the case of charge support, we also gain 1 energy at this time. You may now also resolve initiative. Take the combat card that you dealt to your agent board in step 3 and look at it. You may choose to replace a card in the timing row with it, or simply discard it. In step 5, the agents can rearrange the timing sequence. This allows them to make the timing of the cards more favorable. Many combat cards have effects that negate adjacent cards, rendering them ineffective. The agents want to negate strike and hazard cards while preventing attack and support cards from being negated. Of course, we don't really care if charge support is negated at this stage because we've already resolved its effects. To move a card requires the agent to alter time itself, which is demanding. Every card has a timing cost. To move a combat card, you must pay energy equal to its timing cost, and the timing cost of each card it passes over. In this example, we see Wisdom Attack moving from timing 3 to timing 2, passing over Charge Attack. This costs a total of 2 energy, 1 for the cost of Wisdom Attack and 1 for the cost of Charge Attack. In step 6, we will implement any negate effects on cards. We start by resolving the leftmost card in timing 1 and moving to the right along the row. Negated cards are rotated 90 degrees to the right and will not have an effect in this combat. However, they remain in their timings for the purposes of working out adjacency and other elements that affect the combat card row. In our example of Forsental's attack, we see that Block attempts to negate Wisdom Attack, but cannot because Wisdom Attack cannot be negated. If Forsental had not rearranged the timings, the charged attack would have been negated. Once we've negated cards, we can move on to step 7 and execute the timing sequence. In this step, we will calculate the results of our upright combat cards and apply any bonuses or penalties. Apply all gains and losses to energy, health, and clarity. Finally, calculate the amount of damage you've dealt by counting the values in the red damage symbol. The total value is your attack damage, so Forsental will deal 4 damage. In step 8, each agent engages an enemy card in the enemy row and deals the attack damage to it. Each agent can only engage 1 enemy, so you'll have to coordinate your attacks. Fortunately, we have 4 agents and only 3 enemies, so we should be okay. But any enemy that isn't engaged by an agent during this step will do extra damage when the enemies retaliate. In this example, Forsental will engage the Sentinel Orb and deal 4 damage to it. If there is any additional damage dealt due to agent skills, cards, or enemy weaknesses or immunities, make sure to factor those in now. If the total damage an enemy receives meets or exceeds the enemy's health, then they're defeated. If not, mark it using the red damage counters. The small counters are 1 damage and the large counter is 5. Don't forget to apply any additional effects like stun. If an enemy is defeated, then rotate it 90 degrees to the right to indicate it is no longer in combat. The group may immediately divide the energy reward in the top right of the enemy card among the agents in whatever way they like. In step 9, the enemies retaliate. Any enemy card in the row that has not been defeated or stunned will activate. Enemy cards are activated from left to right. There are 3 stages to an enemy's attack: unengaged attack, base attack, and rage attack. When an enemy card activates, first check whether any of the agents chose to engage this enemy in step 8. If they did not, then this counts as an unengaged enemy. Unengaged enemies deal 1 health and 1 clarity damage to the group before resolving anything else. Now all enemies will resolve their base attack in the top right of their card. After resolving the base attack, check to see if the enemy resolves their rage attack. The rage attack is divided into 3 tiers based on the current era that the group is in. The green era, 1077, the yellow era, 2077, and the blue era, 3077. Not every enemy has an entry for each era. Find the appropriate era tier and check the required rage value. Now check the total rage value of the group's combat cards. This is the number of red skull symbols in the middle right of all non-negated combat cards. In this example, Forsental has a rage value of 1, which must be added to the group's total rage value. If the group's rage value equals or exceeds the enemy card's required rage value for this era tier, then you must also execute the rage attack in the box below. In this case, the Vault Knight removes 2 damage. Note that any agents that were stunned in step 9 during the enemy's attacks will hang on to their stun tokens until the next step 3, and when they would draw a combat row, instead they don't get to draw any cards at all. They can then discard the stun token. In step 10, remove any stun tokens from enemy cards. Then all combat cards are discarded to their respective agent's discard pile. And then we'll check to see if there are enemies left undefeated. If there are, then we'll carry out another round of combat starting with step 1, another opportunity for the agents to change their weapons if they like. Otherwise, we can proceed to the final step, Step 11, Rewards. Step 11 is carried out once all enemies are defeated. Check defeated enemies for any treasure rewards displayed next to the energy in the top left of the card. Draw the corresponding number and color of treasure cards. If the players cannot agree on how to distribute the treasure cards, then have each agent pick one treasure card, starting with the leader and continuing clockwise until all treasure is claimed, burned for energy, or discarded. Then discard the enemy cards and proceed to the refresh phase. It's worth keeping in mind that agents who have run out of combat cards in their deck will no longer be able to draw cards during combat. They can still participate with any abilities, but they'll need to take the rally action in the refresh phase in order to recover their combat cards. So that's everything you need to know to travel back in time and confront Deacon Pageant. You're ready to start playing. Before I go, I'm going to quickly summarize the additional game modes. This is not information you need to play the game, and these modes are best suited to introduce after you've finished the main game. There are 4 additional game modes: Exploration Mode, Co-op Competitive Mode, Boss Run Mode, and the Unshackled Mode. In Exploration Mode, we'll distribute random event tokens across the entirety of the mansion. You can pick any map for this mode, and every player starts with 1 treasure card. The objective is to see if you can resolve all the event tokens without dying. In Co-op Competitive Mode, we're playing the Exploration Mode, but also competing with one another. Each player will have a secret objective which is on their contract cards, with the envelope on the back. The contract card will reward the player with data shards at the end of the game if they have completed their objective. Players can also pick up data shards by landing a killing blow on an enemy. They receive 1 data shard for green enemies, 2 for blue enemies, and 3 shards for red enemies. Whichever player has the most data shards after the contract cards are revealed wins. Boss Run Mode is the same as Exploration Mode, except every time you summon enemies when resolving a random event token, you add a unique purple boss enemy to the group. Unshackled Mode is another variation of Exploration Mode that's only available in the deluxe version of the game. It is recommended to play after you've finished the main game. In Unshackled Mode, set up as you would for the Exploration Mode, but each agent will move around independently, and you will use agent-specific markers instead of the group token. The group doesn't have shared health or clarity. Instead, each agent will have their own health and their own clarity. Players will take full turns instead of sharing the turn, and must resolve combats on their own. So that's it from me. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you found it helpful or you've enjoyed it, please leave a like down below, and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss my live stream where I play through the first chapter of Castle von Loghan. Hope to see you there. Bye bye.